A few weeks ago, we joined together with local churches in the United Church of Christ around the country to embark on a 3-week series of stories about two prophets whose lives changed the world. The first being the prophet Elijah, and the second, the prophet Elisha. So, 2 weeks ago, we first heard the story of Elijah's call to overcome his fear and get about doing the work God had called him to do, namely, anointing a new king. Then, a week later, we heard the story of how Elisha had been called to pick up the mantle of Elijah in order to continue to accomplish God's unfolding desires. So now this week, we'll finish the series by hearing the story of a remarkable healing that Elijah effected. Now, each of the stories contain a powerful lesson that seem almost scripted for these perilous times. The first week, a lesson about what it means to do when we've been called to do the hard work. And the second week, a lesson that says none of us, not even the great Elijah himself, can try to accomplish God's work alone. So, what then is the lesson of today's story? Well, let's not get the cart in front of the horse. Let's begin by listening carefully to the story and digging in to see if we can figure that out. So, here now the reading from 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 14. And I'll share it from the Common English Bible. Naaman, a general for the king of Aram, was a great man and highly regarded by his master, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. This man was a mighty warrior, but he had a skin disease. Now Aramean raiding parties had gone out and captured a young girl from the land of Israel. She served Naaman's wife. The girl said to her mistress, "I wish that my master could come before the prophet who lives in Samaria. He would cure him of his skin disease." So Naaman went and told his master what the young girl from the land of Israel had said. Then Aram's king said, "Go ahead, I'll send a letter to Israel's king." So Naaman left. He took along 10 kikars of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing, and he brought the letter to Israel's king. The letter read, "Along with this letter, I'm sending you my servant Naaman, so you can cure him of his skin disease." When the king of Israel read the letter, he ripped his clothes and said, "What? Am I God to hand out death and life? But this king writes me asking me to cure someone of his skin disease. You must realize that he just wants to start a fight with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that Israel's king had ripped his clothes, he sent word to the king, "Why did you rip your clothes? Let the man come to me, and then he'll know there's a prophet in Israel." Naaman arrived with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent out a messenger who said, "Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and become clean." But Naaman went away in anger. He said, "I thought for sure that he'd come out, stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the bad spot, and cure the skin disease. Aren't the rivers in Damascus, the Abana and the Pharpar, better than all of Israel's waters? Couldn't I wash in them and get clean?" So he turned away and proceeded to leave in anger. Naaman's servants came up to him and spoke. "Our father, if the prophet had told you to do something difficult, wouldn't you have done it? All he said to you was wash and become clean." So Naaman went down and bathed in the Jordan 7 times, just as the man of God had said, and his skin was restored like that of a young boy, and he became clean. And thus ends the sacred reading. So, in order to dig in and figure out the primary lesson for today, you have to begin by figuring out who the star of the story is. For how you answer the question goes a long way in determining what you think the lesson is. Now, many, in fact, most, might answer the question by saying, it's clear that Naaman is the star. After all, he was the great warrior and general who had led his home country, Aram, to an important victory over Israel. He was the one plagued by illness, and he was the one who got healed. Naaman's clearly the star. Well, if Naaman is your answer, then I suppose the primary lesson would be about humbling oneself so that you have the courage to seek healing from the most unlikely of people in the most unlikely of places. And all of that would make sense. And you could never even hear enough lessons about the importance of humility. But the longer I sat with the story, and the longer I looked around the world today and saw all of its problems, the more I began to realize that the question about who the star of the story is really a trick question. For the answer to the question doesn't involve just one person. No, as Haywood Berenger Spangler says, the answer involves several. And those several are not the group of people you would expect. For you see, if you were to outline the story and list the cast of characters, the list of characters would be quite impressive indeed. You would not only have Naaman, the warrior and general of which I spoke, but you would also have his master, whom Naaman consulted at the start of the story, and even a king, both of Aram and Israel. Most would assume that the star would have to be located in that impressive group of characters. But if you think that, you'd be wrong. For as Spangler noted, none, I repeat, none of those important people could perceive where and how God is at work. The true stars, friends, comes from the opposite end of the social ladder, in the form of an unnamed slave girl from a defeated nation who pointed the powerful general to the place he could find healing. It came in the form of an unknown foreign prophet who had just started a new job, a job serving a God who was largely unknown to the general. And it came in the form of those lowly servants of the general who convinced him to hang in there and literally take his medicine when Naaman was about to storm off in anger. Friends, it was that lowly cast of characters, Spangler said, who perceived where and how God was moving. And when you put that cast of characters into the lead role, the lesson of today's story changes. It's no longer just about humility. Now, the primary lesson, Carrie Mitchell writes, is that God employs ordinary people to act in extraordinary ways in order to heal the world. And friends, that is a lesson we must hear at this precarious point in our country's history. For as you know, many of us have been thrown by a series of decisions by the Supreme Court over the last few weeks that have addressed some of the most important issues of our time. Things like the epidemic of gun violence, a woman's right to comprehensive health care, and the work needed to combat global climate change. And as those issues have arisen, we've tended to get sucked into this age-old belief that it's only the extraordinary people who can solve those problems for us. Folks like Supreme Court justices, United States senators, and the United States president. And all of those folks represent the Naamans of our day. And then, along comes this morning's story and blows up our assumption about how a way forward will come. It reminds us that healing and hope won't come from the extraordinary. It will come from the ordinary. The slave girls, the unknown prophets, the servants, the you, and the me. It is through those whom the world would call ordinary that God chooses to work in order to accomplish the extraordinary. It is through us whom God will pave a way forward to healing and hope. And so, friends, as we face the challenges before us, let us look to those ordinary places, even those ordinary places within, knowing and trusting that God will help us find a way forward. May it be so. Amen.